The first time I pulled up the actual zoning ordinance for a mid-sized suburban county in Ohio, not the summary, the actual document, I sat with it for a long time. Because buried in section 1153.04 under minimum habitable floor area requirements, it said no dwelling unit shall be less than 950 square feet. That's it. That's the whole law. No engineering basis cited, no safety study referenced, just a number. And that number, quietly, makes it illegal to build 6 of the 7 homes I'm about to show you in that county alone. I'm Chris Allen. I've spent the last few years documenting alternative housing techniques, forgotten building systems in the specific regulatory architecture that keeps them off the table for ordinary people. And what I found, what I keep finding, is that the barrier almost never comes from physics. It almost never comes from safety. It comes from a sentence in a zoning code that was written before most of us were born by a commission whose meeting notes, when you can find them, reveal very little about public safety and quite a lot about property values. There's a reason these 7 homes are disappearing from the conversation, and it's more deliberate than most people realize. If you want to keep seeing the building techniques, housing systems, and engineering methods that mainstream construction would rather you didn't know about, subscribe now, because this is only the beginning. So let me start with the one that surprised me most, because honestly, I expected to find fringe stuff, experimental stuff, things that failed in the real world and got retired for good reasons. What I actually found was the opposite. The manufactured home sitting on a permanent foundation in rural North Carolina. I stood inside one of these about 2 years ago, a double-section cross-mod unit, 1,400 square feet, pitched roof, board and batten siding, hardwood floors, and I genuinely could not tell standing in the kitchen that I wasn't in a site-built house. I had to go outside and look at the seam line where the 2 sections were joined to remind myself. The owner paid $138,000 for the structure. His neighbor, same street, similar square footage, traditional stick-built, paid $340,000. Same county, same school district, same road.
That's not an anecdote. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies published an analysis, this came out in early 2024, that pegged the construction cost of a basic single-section manufactured home at roughly 35% of a comparable site-built home. 35%. For a larger double-section unit, you're looking at around 60% of the traditional cost. And for the cross-mod models, the ones that most closely resemble conventional housing, you're still at 73%. Now add land, add site prep, add delivery and installation. The gap closes somewhat, but even all in, the Harvard numbers show a savings range of $50,000 to over $100,000 compared to building the same square footage traditionally. And this isn't a trailer from 1974. The HUD code, the federal manufacturing standard that governs these structures, has been in place since 1976 and was significantly updated in September 2024 to allow for more modern and accessible designs. Then there's the tiny home on a permanent foundation. I want to be specific here because the term gets muddy. I'm not talking about a van. I'm not talking about a trailer with a loft that you park in someone's driveway. I'm talking about a fully code-engineered structure under 400 square feet built on a poured concrete foundation with insulation, electrical, plumbing, the works. The International Residential Code actually wrote a specific section for exactly this structure. It's called Appendix Q and was added to the 2018 IRC precisely to address the reality that standard residential code requirements, staircase dimensions, ceiling heights, egress window sizing, were physically incompatible with small footprint design. Appendix Q relaxes those specific requirements for homes under 400 square feet. It exists. It's real. It's in the code that 49 of 50 states have adopted as their baseline. And yet, the majority of American municipalities have not adopted Appendix Q locally, which means the federal-level accommodation exists, the engineering framework exists, and in most cities, you still cannot build it.
The ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, the granny flat, the backyard cottage, call it what you want, is a different kind of restriction. This one isn't about size, it's about the definition of a single-family lot. A garage conversion in your own backyard, connected to your own utilities, sitting on your own property. In most U.S. residential zones, that is a criminal code violation. Not because it's structurally unsound, not because it fails any engineering test, but because the zoning designation on your lot says one primary dwelling unit, full stop. A 2025 analysis from the Mercatus Center found that only 18 states have passed laws broadly allowing homeowners to build and rent out ADUs, and 11 of those passed their laws within just the last 4 years. 18 out of 50. So in 32 states, depending on your municipality, adding a legally rentable unit to your own land is either heavily restricted or flatly impossible. The shipping container home is the fourth. And this one I want to handle carefully because the mythology around it is almost as interesting as the structure itself. I've walked through a completed container conversion in the Portland, Oregon area, a 40-foot high cube unit properly anchored to a helical pier foundation, spray-foamed interior, mini-split HVAC, the whole thing, and the thermal performance was genuinely impressive. Steel conducts heat, yes, but properly insulated Corten steel with a quality spray foam application achieves R values competitive with conventional framing. The IBC 2021 Section 3115 explicitly recognizes intermodal shipping containers as valid structural building modules when properly modified. That's in the International Building Code. It's not a gray area. But here's where it starts to not make sense. And this is the part I kept coming back to. The code says it's valid. The engineering says it works. The structures exist and perform. And in the majority of American residential zones, you cannot build one. So the question isn't whether these homes work. They clearly do. The question is why the permission to build them has been so systematically withheld, and who benefits from that arrangement.
Let me tell you about a city council meeting in Huntsville, Texas in 2023. The council passed an ordinance banning the placement of manufactured homes on private property within city limits, not in a commercial zone, not near a school, on private property that the homeowner already owned. The reversal was eventually reversed only after residents who already lived in manufactured homes showed up and pushed back hard enough to make it uncomfortable. And here's what struck me about that story when I found it. The reversal didn't happen because someone proved the homes were safe. Everyone already knew they were safe. The reversal happened because the political pressure temporarily outweighed the financial pressure going the other direction. That's the dynamic I keep seeing. And once you see it, the pattern across all 7 home types becomes very hard to ignore. Start with the money. The National Association of Home Builders, the NAHB, spent approximately $26 million in lobbying and political contributions in the 2022 election cycle alone, according to opensources.org. Their membership is overwhelmingly composed of traditional site-built home contractors. Manufactured home manufacturers are separately represented by the Manufactured Home Institute, with a fraction of that lobbying budget. The NAHB's policy positions have historically supported minimum square footage requirements, construction standards that advantage site-build methods, and zoning frameworks that limit the expansion of manufactured housing into single-family residential zones. I'm not saying there's a memo. I'm saying there's a financial interest, a lobbying apparatus, and a regulatory outcome that lines up with that interest in a way that is not coincidental. Then there's the code adoption process itself, which most people don't realize is not a government function. The International Residential Code, the IRC, the baseline that 49 states reference, is written and published by the International Code Council, a nonprofit. That sounds neutral, but the ICC's membership includes building material manufacturers, construction industry associations, and code enforcement officials. The people who profit from complex, expensive construction methods have a seat at the table where the rules for construction get written. Appendix Q, the tiny home provision, the one that would make sub-400 square foot homes legally buildable in most jurisdictions, was added to the 2018 IRC after years of advocacy by a small coalition of alternative housing researchers. It is still not adopted by the majority of American municipalities. That didn't happen by accident. Now look at what happens when someone actually tries to build one of these homes in a restricted jurisdiction. There's a documented case out of Port Townsend, Washington. A homeowner built a 280 square foot structure on her own property, permitted as a storage shed, then attempted to convert it to a dwelling. The county issued a cease and desist. The cost to bring the structure into compliance under standard residential code, not because anything was structurally wrong with it, but because the square footage didn't meet the minimum habitable area ordinance, was estimated at more than the structure was worth. She eventually had to demolish it. The total financial loss was somewhere around $35,000. That's not an isolated case. It's the predictable outcome of a system designed to make non-conformance expensive enough to deter the attempt.
The Earthship situation is its own chapter. Michael Reynolds started building Earthship homes in Taos, New Mexico in the early 1970s, structures made from rammed earth, recycled tires, and aluminum cans, designed to be thermally massive enough to maintain interior temperatures between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit year-round without a conventional HVAC system. The thermal mass principle he was using wasn't new. Adobe construction in the American Southwest had used the same physics for centuries, but Reynolds' specific method, using recycled tires packed with rammed earth as the primary wall unit, ran directly into building codes that had no category for it. Not because it was unsafe. A 1993 University of New Mexico structural analysis found Earthship walls capable of exceeding standard residential load requirements, but because the code didn't have a box for it, it defaulted to non-compliant. Reynolds eventually had to fight the state of New Mexico for a specific legislative exemption, the Sustainable Development Testing Site Act of 2007, just to legally continue building homes that had been standing, performing, and housing people without utility bills for 30 years. I should be honest about something here. I don't think every zoning official wakes up in the morning planning to protect the home building industry's profit margin. Some of this is institutional inertia. Codes get written, codes get inherited, and changing them requires someone to spend political capital arguing that a 950-foot minimum has no engineering basis, which is a boring argument that doesn't win elections. So the codes stay, and the industry that benefits from the code staying doesn't complain.
The geodesic dome is almost a perfect illustration of how aesthetic politics gets dressed up as safety code. There are municipalities, I found one in Utah and there are others, where the local zoning ordinance specifies a minimum roof pitch of 3 and 12, meaning the roof must rise at least 3 inches for every 12 inches of horizontal run. A geodesic dome, by geometric definition, cannot meet that requirement. The dome's surface curves continuously. There is no pitch in the conventional sense. So a structure that Buckminster Fuller spent decades engineering, a structure the American Institute of Architects awarded its highest honor in 1970, citing it as the strongest, lightest, most efficient means of enclosing space yet devised, is illegal to build in those municipalities, not because it fails structurally, but because it doesn't have a conventional roof. That's the system. And now that you can see it clearly, let's talk about what you can actually do about it. Here's what I want you to take away from everything I've just shown you, because this is where most people get stuck. They see the restrictions, they feel the weight of the system, and they conclude that the door is closed. It isn't. It's just not on the wall they've been looking. The first thing to understand is that zoning is hyperlocal. What's banned in a suburban Ohio county may be completely unrestricted 20 miles away in an unincorporated township. Manufactured homes are now legally permitted wherever single-family dwellings are allowed in Maine, Maryland, and New Hampshire. Those laws passed in 2024. Oregon eliminated single-family only zoning statewide in 2019, which means duplexes, ADUs, and smaller alternative structures are buildable by right in cities over 25,000 people. Arizona now mandates that any municipality over 75,000 must permit ADUs on single-family lots. These aren't loopholes, they're actual legislative shifts, and they're accelerating.
The practical starting point, and I mean the very first thing, before you buy land, before you hire anyone, before you spend $1, is your county's GIS parcel viewer. Every county in America publishes one. You pull up your target parcel, you find the zoning designation, and then you go directly to that jurisdiction's municipal code and look up what structures are permitted in that zone by right.
Not what a real estate agent tells you, not what a contractor assumes, the actual document. Because that document is where the restriction lives, and it's also where the pathway out of it lives. The second thing is understanding the difference between a zoning restriction and a deed covenant. I've seen people clear the zoning hurdle completely and then get blindsided by a CC&R, a covenant, condition, and restriction, written into their property's deed in 1987 that says site-built homes only. Those are private contracts. They survive zoning reform. Before closing on any land where you intend to build an alternative structure, you pull the title commitment document and search it specifically for that language. A real estate attorney with land use experience, not a general practitioner, can do that review somewhere between $500 and $1,500. That is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy. For anyone seriously moving toward one of these builds, the resources I've found most reliable are linked below. Permit-ready plan packages for container and manufactured home projects, the IRC Appendix Q full text, county-level zoning lookup tools, and a land use attorney directory organized by state. I'm not recommending those because they sponsored anything. I'm recommending them because they're what I actually used, and because going in without them costs significantly more than the resources themselves.
Now, before you take a single physical step, here's what you need to verify. Pull your target parcel's zoning designation and confirm what structures are permitted by right. Read the title commitment for CC&Rs that restrict structure type. Call the local planning department directly and ask whether your structure type requires a variance or is permitted outright. Confirm whether your state has adopted IRC Appendix Q if you're pursuing a sub-400 square foot build, and verify that your intended builder carries a PE-stamped plan set, a licensed professional engineer's signature, because without that, most alternative home permit applications don't survive first review. The path exists, it's just not marked.